Nefertiti is one of the most popular individuals from ancient Egypt.
One of the reasons we don't know a great deal about Nefertiti and her family is because they were erased from history.
Everyone is obsessed with the golden mask of King Tut. But what if I told you the real story isn't about the boy king, but the woman who came before him? For over 3,000 years, Queen Nefertiti has been nothing more than a beautiful face on a limestone bust, a silent icon frozen in time. But that silence just got shattered.
On the basis of the genetics and also what we can glean from the textual data from the period, the most likely outcome is the younger lady is Nefertiti.
Modern science has finally done the unthinkable, peering into the microscopic history hidden within ancient bone. And what they found is not just surprising, it is absolutely terrifying. We are talking about a legacy of biological devastation, secret chambers, and a queen who might have been hiding in plain sight this whole time. The Golden Empire that vanished overnight. To understand why this DNA discovery is so shocking, you first have to understand the sheer magnitude of what was lost. We need to set the scene because Nefertiti wasn't just a queen. She was a co-ruler, a goddess on earth who stood shoulder to shoulder with her husband, Pharaoh Akhenaten. Together, they did something that had never been done before in the history of Egypt. They dismantled the old gods, fired the powerful priesthood of Amun, and moved the entire capital city to a remote, hostile patch of desert called Amarna. It was a religious revolution, and for a few fleeting years, they were the center of the universe. They lived in a golden city dedicated to the sun disk, the A10. This wasn't your typical ancient city. It was built in a hurry, a pop-up metropolis of white stone and shimmering heat. Art from this period shows them as a loving, intimate family, often holding their 6 daughters, basking under the rays of the sun, God who offered them ankhs, or life symbols. It paints a picture of domestic perfection and absolute power. They were the ultimate power couple, rewriting the rules of reality itself. But it's not that simple, though. There is something deeply unsettling about the art from this era. If you look closely at the statues of Akhenaten, and even some depictions of Nefertiti, they don't look like typical humans. They have elongated skulls, distended bellies, wide hips, and spider-like fingers. For decades, fringe theorists have gone wild with this, claiming this is proof of ancient alien contact. They say Nefertiti and her husband were hybrids, visitors from the stars who came to teach humanity about the one true light. While that sounds like science fiction, the reality hiding in their genes might be even stranger than aliens. Just as their power reached its peak, the records stopped cold. It is one of history's greatest vanishing acts. Around the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, Nefertiti simply evaporates from the historical timeline. One day she is leading processions and smiting enemies on temple walls. The next, she is gone. There is no record of her passing, no grand funeral procession, and most suspiciously, no tomb ever found. For centuries, historians assumed she fell out of favor, perhaps exiled to a harem, or maybe she passed away from a plague that swept through the ancient world. But the lack of evidence has always felt intentional, like a crime scene that had been scrubbed clean. The temples they built were dismantled stone by stone. Their names were chiseled out of walls, and the city of Amarna was abandoned to the desert sands. It was as if the desert itself was ordered to swallow them whole. What most people don't realize is that the ancient Egyptians believed that if you spoke a dead person's name, you kept them alive in the afterlife. Conversely, to destroy a name, to hack it out of the stone, was to destroy the soul eternally. It was a fate worse than death. It meant total oblivion. Someone wanted Nefertiti gone, not just from the earth, but from eternity. They wanted to make sure she could never navigate the underworld, never reach the field of reeds. For decades, archaeologists have been sifting through the sands, desperate for a clue, a cartouche, or a bone fragment. They found plenty of mummies, sure, but the great royal wife remained a ghost. She was the most famous woman in the ancient world, the face that launched 1 million museum visits, yet she was nowhere to be found. The mystery of her disappearance became the holy grail of Egyptology, a puzzle with missing pieces that seemed lost forever. Until now. Because science has finally caught up with history, and the sand is starting to give up its secrets. Deep within the Valley of the Kings, long before DNA sequencing was even a dream, explorers were stumbling upon tombs that didn't fit the narrative. The valley is a place of death and silence, a canyon baked by the sun where the pharaohs hoped to sleep forever. But it is also a place of chaos. Tomb robbers, flash floods, and political enemies have churned through these graves for 3,000 years. In 1817, a strongman and explorer named Giovanni Belzoni discovered a tomb known as KV-21. Belzoni was looking for gold, for grand statues, for the shiny stuff. What he found was a disappointment to him, but a goldmine for modern genetics. Inside, intruders found 2 female mummies, stripped of their wrappings, their jewelry gone, left to rot in the darkness. They were nameless, headless in some reports, and in such bad shape that for a long time, no one paid them much attention. One had her arm crossed over her chest in the queen's pose, a specific burial posture reserved for royal women. But with no name, she was just a body. They were just debris left over from a tomb robbery, or so it seemed. One of them, catalogued as KV-21B, would eventually become a focal point of this modern investigation. But there was another discovery, one that would prove even more pivotal. In 1898, Victor Loret opened the walls of KV-35, the tomb of Amenhotep II. It was a massive find, a cache of royal mummies hidden away by priests to protect them from looters. Imagine walking into a dark, stale chamber, the air thick with the dust of centuries, and seeing pile after pile of Egypt's greatest kings. But amidst the great kings of old, there were 3 unwrapped bodies dumped unceremoniously in a side chamber: a young boy, an older woman, and a younger woman. The younger woman, known simply as the Younger Lady, was a tragic sight. She had been brutally damaged by ancient tomb robbers, or so the story went. Her chest was smashed, her right arm was missing, and there was a gaping, horrific hole in her face where her mouth and jaw used to be. It looked like a scream frozen in dried flesh. For over a century, she was a museum curiosity, a mummy with no name and a face of agony. People walked past her glass case, unaware they might be looking at the most powerful woman of the 18th dynasty. It wasn't until 2010 that researchers decided to look closer, not with their eyes, but with genetics. The crazy part is, they weren't even looking for Nefertiti at first. They were trying to build the family tree of King Tut. They wanted to know who his parents were, since the historical records were so muddled. The Amarna period is a black hole in the records because the later kings, like Horemheb and Ramesses, tried to erase it. So, the scientists had to go to the source. They took samples from the bone marrow of these anonymous mummies, drilling into the ancient iliac crests to extract mitochondrial DNA and nuclear DNA. And that is putting it lightly. The results that came back from the lab sent shockwaves through the entire archaeological community. The DNA proved that the Younger Lady from KV-35 was not just some random concubine. She was the biological mother of King Tutankhamun. And more than that, she was the full sister of the mummy found in KV-55. Now pause for a second. The mummy in KV-55 is almost certainly Akhenaten. The genetics match, the age matches, and the tomb contained items belonging to him. This revelation narrowed down the possibilities significantly. We knew Tut's father was Akhenaten, so his mother had to be someone important. But here is the snag. Nefertiti was never known as Akhenaten's sister. History records her as likely being the daughter of a high-ranking court official named A. So, we are left with a massive contradiction. Was the Younger Lady Nefertiti, and history got her lineage wrong? It wouldn't be the first time ancient propaganda misled us. Or was she someone else entirely, a shadow queen whose name has been lost? Some theories suggest this Younger Lady could be a secondary wife named Kia, or perhaps one of Akhenaten's own daughters that he married in a twisted attempt to keep the bloodline pure. But the face, the facial reconstruction of the Younger Lady, bears a striking, haunting resemblance to the famous Berlin bust of Nefertiti. The high cheekbones, the jawline, the spacing of the eyes. Is it possible that the DNA is telling us a truth we are afraid to accept? that Nefertiti was actually the king's sister all along, making their union even more genetically disastrous? The bloodline that was doomed from the start. The DNA analysis didn't just give us names, it gave us a medical chart that reads like a horror story. When scientists mapped the genome of the Amarna royal family, they found a distinct and terrifying lack of genetic diversity. The ancient Egyptian royals were obsessed with keeping their bloodline pure to mimic the gods. The gods Isis and Osiris were brother and sister, and they produced Horus. The pharaohs wanted to emulate this divine perfection. But biology doesn't care about royal titles or religious dogma. Biology punishes lack of diversity. The genetic profile of Tutankhamun and his mother, the younger lady, showed a massive accumulation of harmful recessive genes. We are talking about skeletal deformities, club feet, scoliosis, and immune systems that were practically non-existent. Basically, the entire family was walking on eggshells. They were fragile, sickly, and living on borrowed time. The scan of the younger lady, who many still argue is Nefertiti, revealed that she likely suffered from a condition that made her bones incredibly brittle. But there is a wilder theory here that links back to the alien-looking statues. Some geneticists have suggested the family suffered from Marfan syndrome or something similar, a disorder that causes elongated limbs, fingers, and faces. Others point to Antley-Bixler syndrome, which causes skull fusion issues. This explains why Akhenaten looked so strange in his statues. He wasn't an alien, he was a walking collection of genetic errors. And if Nefertiti was his sister, she carried the same time bomb in her cells. This context changes everything about the violence found on her body. The massive wound to her face, which shattered her jaw and teeth, was originally thought to be the work of looters digging for gold amulets hidden in the wrappings. Looters were brutal. They would rip heads off to get to necklaces. But modern forensic analysis by experts like Dr. Zahi Hawass suggests something far more sinister. The CT scans show that the wound has specific characteristics that differ from post-mortem damage. Some experts argue there are signs of a hematoma or bone reaction that suggests it happened perimortem, right around the time of death. If this mummy is Nefertiti, she didn't pass away peacefully in her sleep. That blow to the face would have been fatal. It suggests she was struck with a heavy, blunt object with immense force. Given the fragile nature of her bones revealed by the DNA, such a blow would have been catastrophic. It paints a picture of a violent end, perhaps an assassination. Let's get wild for a second. Consider the political climate. Akhenaten had destroyed the economy, banned the old gods, and alienated the army. People were furious. When he died, Nefertiti was left holding the bag. Did the priests of Amun, eager to restore their power, corner the queen in her palace? Did a general, perhaps Horemheb, decide that the only way to save Egypt was to silence the heretic queen forever? The smashed mouth is symbolic. In ancient Egypt, you need your mouth to speak the spells in the afterlife. Smashing the mouth was to make sure she could never speak to the gods again. And here is where the terrifying aspect of the DNA really hits home. It is not just about the violence she suffered, it is about the legacy she passed on. The DNA of the two fetuses found in King Tut's tomb, his unborn daughters, shows the end of the line. They were stillborn, likely due to the compounding genetic errors passed down from Akhenaten and his sister wife, and then from Tut to his own wife, who was also his half-sister. The Amarna bloodline didn't just end, it collapsed under the weight of its own biological failure. There is another wild theory that the plague mentioned in texts from this time wasn't just a normal sickness. Some researchers speculate that the royal family's incestuous practices made them patient zeros for a specific genetic vulnerability that left them open to a sweeping pandemic, perhaps the very first recorded instance of a biologically amplified plague wiping out a dynasty. If KV-21b is indeed Nefertiti, her DNA links her to this tragic cycle of deformity and death. She wasn't just a ruler, she was a victim of the very tradition she upheld. But there is a twist in the timeline that makes this even more complex. Before King Tut took the throne, There was a shadowy pharaoh named Smenkhkare who ruled for a very short time. For decades, scholars assumed this was a man, perhaps a brother or son of Akhenaten. But the evidence is starting to point in a different direction. What if Smenkhkare wasn't a man at all? What if Nefertiti didn't die in year 12? The theory goes that she elevated herself to the status of co-regent, taking on a new name, Nefertiti, and eventually ruled as a full king, just like Hatshepsut did generations before her. There are clues scattered all over the place if you know where to look. Inscriptions show a figure with the double crown of a pharaoh, but with the distinct hips and body shape of a woman. Some of the burial goods found in King Tut's tomb, the famous gold mask, the canopic coffinets, show signs of being reworked. Names were scratched out and replaced. The face on the gold mask of Tutankhamun, the most famous object in the world, has fascinated art historians because it looks distinctly feminine. It has pierced ears, which kings didn't typically have on their death masks, and looks remarkably similar to the bust of Nefertiti. Did Tut inherit his stepmother's burial gear because she died suddenly, or because her memory was being erased? The theory suggests that Nefertiti ruled as a king to hold the empire together, while Tut was just a child. She had to act like a man to command respect. But this gender-bending rule would have been the final straw for the traditionalists. A woman acting as a man, worshipping a sun disk, ignoring the old gods, it was too much. If Nefertiti became a female king, it explains why her tomb is missing. Kings were buried in the Valley of the Kings, not the queens. It explains the erasure. When the old order was restored, the priests wouldn't just want to wipe out a heretic queen. They would want to wipe out the double heresy of a woman who acted like a man. This theory aligns with the violence found on the younger lady mummy. A female pharaoh in a time of crisis would have a target on her back the size of Egypt. And let's look at the Hittite letters, which provide one of the wildest twists in this saga. An Egyptian queen, referred to as Dakamunzu, which likely just means the wife of the king, wrote a desperate letter to the king of the Hittites, Egypt's sworn enemy. She wrote, "My husband is dead, and I have no son. Send me one of your sons, and he will be my husband and king of Egypt." She added, "I am afraid. I will never take one of my subjects as a husband." This doesn't sound like a woman confident in her power. This sounds like a woman surrounded by sharks. This sounds like Nefertiti, or perhaps her daughter Meritaten, realizing that the walls were closing in. She was trying to pull a geopolitical Hail Mary, uniting Egypt and the Hittite Empire to save her own skin. The Hittite king was suspicious, but eventually sent his son, Prince Zenanza. But the prince never arrived. He was eliminated at the Egyptian border. This was the smoking gun of a coup. A powerful figure in the Egyptian court, likely the Vizier I, who would later become Pharaoh himself, intercepted the prince and had him eliminated. If A was willing to eliminate a foreign prince to seize power, what would he do to Nefertiti? This supports the theory that she was silenced, her face smashed, and her body dumped in a cache to be forgotten. The grandfather figure, A, who stands in the background of all the Amarna art, might have been the villain of the story all along. The secret door behind the boy king. So, where is she now? The mummies in KV-35 and KV-21 offer tantalizing DNA clues, but the definitive smoking gun is still elusive. We have bodies that could be her, but we don't have the final proof. This brings us to the most controversial theory in modern Egyptology, one that could change history books tomorrow. In 2015, British Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves made a stunning claim. He had been studying high-resolution laser scans of King Tut's tomb, looking at the texture of the walls. He noticed faint linear traces beneath the painted plaster, lines that looked suspiciously like the outline of a doorway that had been plastered over and painted to hide it. His theory is simple but mind-blowing. He believes that King Tut's tomb is actually just the antechamber of a much larger tomb, the tomb of Nefertiti. He argues that when Tut died unexpectedly at 19, they didn't have a tomb ready for him. The country was in chaos. The treasury was drained. So, they cracked open his stepmother's tomb, sealed off her section with a hasty wall, painted some murals over it, and buried him in the hallway. Think about the shape of Tut's tomb. It is weirdly small for a king. It is L-shaped, which is usually reserved for queens, not kings. The layout screams improvisation. If Reeves is right, Nefertiti is sleeping just a few inches away from where millions of tourists have stood. Ground-penetrating radar scans were conducted, and initially they showed voids behind the north and west walls. The world held its breath. Was she right there? However, subsequent scans have been contradictory. Some say there is nothing there. Others say there is definitely something anomalous. Maybe not a tomb, but a void. It has become a heated debate, a battle of technology versus geology. But think about the implications. If she is behind that wall, she would be sitting in an undisturbed royal burial. Tut's tomb was packed with gold, and he was a minor king who ruled for a short time. Nefertiti was a major ruler at the height of Egypt's wealth. Her tomb would contain art, gold, and texts that would make Tut's treasure look like pocket change. But let's throw in one last wild theory that skeptics love. What if the Nefertiti we know never existed? Or rather, what if the image we have of her is a lie? There is a theory popularized by historian Henry Stierlin that the famous bust of Nefertiti in the Berlin Museum, the one that defines her beauty, is a fake. He argues it was created in 1912 by a German sculptor to test ancient pigments and was accidentally presented as a real find. If the bust is a fake, then our entire mental image of this queen is based on a fraud. However, the DNA brings us back to reality. The women in those tombs, the younger lady, the KV-21 mummies, were real. They lived, they suffered, and they died young. The DNA tells us a story of a family that flew too close to the sun. It reveals a woman who was intimately connected to the royal line, who bore children destined to die, and who likely met a violent end herself. Whether she is the younger lady with the smashed face, the silent occupant of KV-21, or waiting behind a wall in Tut's tomb, the science has stripped away the romance. It has replaced the limestone perfection of her famous bust with the brutal reality of human frailty, genetic defects, and political elimination. We used to look at the Amarna period as a time of beautiful art and sun worship. Now, thanks to genetics, we see it as a desperate time of inbreeding, disease, and ruthless power struggles. Nefertiti wasn't just a beauty queen. She was a survivor of a genetic and political nightmare until her luck finally ran out. We finally have the genetic map of the Amarna royals, but instead of solving the puzzle, it has revealed a tragedy written in blood and bone. Do you think the battered mummy of the younger lady is really the lost queen Nefertiti? Or is her true tomb still waiting behind the walls of King Tut's burial chamber? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe for more historical mysteries like this. Thanks for watching.